The poor Apache widow tried to steal the sheriff's horse, but he didn't hurt her. The town of Red Mesa was small, dusty, and quiet most mornings. The sun rose slowly over the flat desert horizon, casting a warm orange light over the wooden buildings. The streets were empty except for a few townspeople walking to their daily chores, and the faint sound of hooves clopping on the dirt roads. Sheriff Tom Gallagher walked steadily along the main street, his long coat brushing against his boots. He had been the town's sheriff for many years, and people respected him for his calm nature and fairness. He wasn't a man who shouted or punished without reason. He believed in justice, but he also believed in kindness. On this particular morning, Tom had been inspecting the outskirts of the town. The corral where the horses were kept was near the edge of Red Mesa, beside an old wooden stable. Some horses belonged to townspeople, but there were a few kept specifically for emergencies or for the sheriff's own use. As he approached the stable, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A shadow shifted near the fence. Tom stopped immediately and squinted, trying to see clearly. The sun was bright and the dust made everything look hazy. At first he thought it might be a stray animal, maybe a coyote or a fox, but then he saw her. She was a small woman, thin and fragile-looking, with dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. Her clothing was worn and tattered, and her bare feet were covered in dirt. She crouched low, her hands on the reins of one of the sheriff's horses. The horse was big and strong, a beautiful brown stallion with a shiny coat. The woman's grip on the reins was tight, and her body trembled slightly as she tried to guide the horse toward the edge of the stable. Tom felt a mix of surprise and concern. He had heard about the woman before. She was a widow from the Apache tribe who had recently come to Red Mesa. People in town whispered about her, some saying she was unlucky, some saying she was proud and would never ask for help. But Tom knew the truth was more complicated. Life could be very harsh, especially for a woman alone in a town that didn't always welcome strangers. He took a careful step forward. "Hey," he called softly, keeping his voice calm so as not to startle her. The woman froze, her eyes wide with fear. She looked around as if hoping no one else had seen her. The horse shifted nervously beneath her, snorting and stamping its hooves. "Why are you taking my horse?" Tom asked again, this time a little louder but still gentle. The woman's hands tightened on the reins. She hesitated, biting her lower lip, and for a moment it seemed as if she might run. Her eyes flicked toward the town, then back at Tom. She was small and weak-looking, but there was a fire in her eyes, a determination that spoke of someone who had faced more hardship than most people could imagine. Finally, she spoke in a soft, trembling voice. I need it," she said. "I have nowhere to go. My daughter, she's hungry." Tom took another step closer, keeping his hands visible so she wouldn't feel threatened. He could see the dirt and dust on her face, the hunger in her eyes, and the worry etched into every line of her small frame. His heart softened. He had seen desperation before, but there was something about her story, about the fear and courage mixed together in her eyes, that made him pause. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Stealing a horse can get you into serious trouble. There are better ways to find help." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. I have tried," she whispered. "I walked for days asking for work, asking for food. No one would help me. My little girl, she hasn't eaten in 2 days. I don't know what to do." Tom nodded slowly. He could see that she was telling the truth. Her clothes were torn, her hands were rough and calloused, and she smelled of dust and travel. She wasn't a thief by choice, she was a mother trying to survive. He also realized that she probably didn't trust him. People who had been rejected so many times often didn't trust kindness when they saw it. "Come with me," he said, taking another step. "I won't hurt you. We can figure this out together." The woman hesitated, glancing at the horse as if she couldn't decide whether to take it or leave it. She seemed torn between fear of punishment and hope for help. Finally, she released the reins, letting the horse step back. Tom reached out carefully and patted the stallion's neck, calming it. The horse nuzzled his hand, sensing the tension in the air. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked down at her feet, ashamed and relieved at the same time. "I didn't mean I didn't know what else to do." Tom shook his head gently. "I know, I understand. Life can be very hard, especially for someone alone, but there are always other ways. You don't have to steal." He led her away from the stable, walking slowly so she wouldn't feel rushed. The woman kept her eyes on the ground, still unsure if she could trust him completely. Tom noticed the small bundle she carried, wrapped in an old cloth, and he realized it must be her daughter. The child was sleeping, exhausted from the long journey and lack of food. Tom's heart ached as he looked at her tiny face, peaceful yet fragile. "You have a little girl," he said softly. "She must be very important to you." The woman nodded. "Everything I do for her," she said. Her voice gained strength, and for the first time she looked up at Tom. I don't want her to go hungry. I don't want her to suffer like I do." Tom smiled faintly. "Then let's find a way to help her without taking what isn't yours." For a moment, the woman seemed surprised. She had expected anger, punishment, maybe even violence. Instead, she found understanding and calm. The tension in her body began to ease, and she finally let herself breathe. They walked toward the edge of town, where a few townspeople were starting their day. Tom didn't call anyone. He didn't want to embarrass her. He simply spoke to her quietly, explaining that there was work she could do in town, that people would pay her for honest labor. He offered to accompany her to make sure she was safe, knowing that trust had to be earned slowly. As they walked, he learned more about her life. She had been married to a kind man who had died the year before, leaving her with nothing. Their small home had been destroyed, and she had traveled miles to find a new place to live. Every day had been a struggle, and now she was alone with a young daughter depending on her. Tom listened quietly, nodding from time to time. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He understood that life was sometimes cruel and that people did desperate things when they had no other choice. He also understood that showing mercy could change a life in ways punishment never could. When they reached a quiet corner of the town square, he stopped. "There is a farm outside town," he said. "They need help with the animals. They will pay you and you will have food for your daughter. You can do honest work and no one will hurt you." The woman looked at him, tears in her eyes. You would help me, even after trying to steal your horse." Tom nodded. "Yes. Because I see that you are not trying to harm anyone. You are trying to survive. That is different." For the first time in days, she smiled faintly. The weight on her shoulders seemed lighter. She had expected punishment, maybe anger, maybe even rejection. Instead, she found understanding and help. She picked up her daughter gently, holding her close. The child stirred but did not wake, sensing the calm in her mother's arms. The woman felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at Tom, her eyes full of gratitude and a quiet strength. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will do everything I can for her." Tom nodded. "I know you will, and I will make sure you have a chance. That's all anyone can ask for." The morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light over Red Mesa. The streets were beginning to fill with townspeople, but in that quiet corner, a small moment of trust and understanding had formed. A widow who had tried to steal a horse now had a chance to rebuild her life, not through theft or luck, but through kindness and determination. And the sheriff, walking back to check the rest of the town, knew that sometimes the hardest battles were not with guns or criminals, but with compassion. He had chosen mercy today, and in doing so had given a small woman and her child a chance for a better life. The widow walked slowly beside Sheriff Tom Gallagher, holding her sleeping daughter tightly against her chest. The child's small head rested on her shoulder, and every now and then her tiny hand twitched in sleep. The widow's own body ached from long days of walking, from carrying her daughter, and from the weight of fear that had followed her for weeks. Her steps were quiet, careful, as if the town itself might judge her for being poor and alone. Tom walked beside her, not saying much. He understood that this woman had suffered, and sometimes the best thing a person could do was simply listen. After a moment, he spoke gently. "You've been traveling for a long time, haven't you?" She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Many days," she said softly. "Since my husband died, I have been alone. I have no home, no family, only my little girl." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed her daughter closer to her chest. "We have walked from one place to another, asking for food, asking for work, but no one helps us. They turn us away. They say I am just a woman, that I have nothing to give. I'm afraid my daughter will not survive if we keep going." Tom listened quietly. He could hear the raw fear in her words, but also the strength. It took courage to speak so honestly to a stranger, to admit how helpless one felt. Most people would hide their desperation, but she spoke openly, as if by saying the words aloud, she could somehow make them less heavy. "Where did you come from?" Tom asked, carefully. She took a deep breath. "I came from the mountains," she said. "We lived near the river, far from towns. My husband, he was a good man. He hunted and gathered what we needed. But one day he fell ill. We had no medicine, no doctor nearby. He could not survive." Her voice faltered and she swallowed hard, trying to continue. "After he died, I had nothing. I stayed for a while in our small home, but it was too lonely, too empty. I knew I had to go, or my daughter and I would have no chance at all." The sheriff nodded. He could feel the depth of her loss. Death in the wilderness was merciless, and to be left alone with a child in that vast, unforgiving land took more courage than many could imagine. He also realized that desperation had driven her to risk stealing his horse. It was not a crime of malice, it was a plea for survival. "You are brave," Tom said quietly. "To come all this way, to keep going even when life has been so cruel, that takes strength." The widow looked at him, her dark eyes shining. She was not used to hearing such words. Most people had treated her with suspicion, fear, or indifference. But here was a man calm and steady, acknowledging her courage. For a moment she felt a small spark of hope. "I only do what I must," she said softly. "I do it for my daughter. She is all I have. If I fail her, I have failed everything." Tom's gaze softened. "And that is why I will help you," he said. "You have not failed her yet. There is still a way to survive without breaking the law." The woman's lips trembled and she blinked back tears. You would help me even after I tried to take your horse," Tom nodded. "Yes, I see that you are not a thief. You are a mother in need. That is very different." The widow's mind raced. She had expected punishment, maybe even anger. Instead, she found understanding. She had spent weeks walking through towns where she was ignored or turned away, and now, for the first time, someone was offering help without judgment. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I have never met anyone like you. Most people, they just look away." Tom smiled faintly. Sometimes people are too afraid or too busy to notice, but there are still those who care. You are not alone here. As they continued walking, the widow began to tell more of her story. She spoke of her home by the river, of the small cabin she and her husband had built with their own hands. She spoke of the nights they had spent listening to the wind, the snow, and the birds in the trees. Her voice grew steadier as she shared memories, and Tom could see that beneath the grief, there was a woman who had loved deeply and fully. "I remember the day he fell sick," she said. "He could not eat or drink properly. I tried to care for him, but I was alone. There was no medicine, no healer. I stayed by his side until he passed. I buried him near our cabin. I cried for hours, then days. I could not stay there alone. The house, the mountains, everything reminded me that he was gone. I had to move, or my daughter and I would have no future." Tom listened, thinking of the strength it took to carry on in such circumstances. He had seen many people struggle, but few with the courage and persistence of this widow. Each word she spoke painted a picture of survival, of grief, and of determination. "Where did you go after that?" he asked. "I walked," she said simply. "From one town to another, hoping to find food, work, something to help us survive. Most townspeople turned me away. Some were kind, but most said we could not stay. I was told we would have to leave. I had nothing to give them, nothing to trade. So I kept walking, always hoping." Her voice broke, and she pressed her daughter closer. "I hoped we would find a place to live, where no one would chase us away, where my daughter could eat and sleep safely." Tom nodded quietly. He could imagine the long, hot days of walking through the desert, the nights spent under the stars with only a thin blanket for warmth. The widow's courage was remarkable, and her love for her child was evident in every gesture, every word. "You are a strong woman," he said, "and your daughter is lucky to have you." The widow looked at him, tears brimming again. "I only do what I must. I do not want pity. I only want a chance to live." Tom smiled gently. "Then you shall have that chance. I will make sure of it." They walked in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The town began to stir, and people glanced curiously at the widow and the sheriff. Some whispered, some stared, but Tom paid no attention. He knew that judgment from strangers could wait. The woman's survival and dignity were far more important. As they approached the edge of town, Tom pointed to a small farm beyond the outskirts. "There is work there," he explained. "They need help with the animals, feeding and caring for them. They will pay you, and you will have food for your daughter. You can stay safely, and you will not be in danger." The widow's eyes widened. She had expected rejection, maybe punishment, but never an offer like this. You are certain?" she asked softly. Tom nodded. "Yes, but you must promise to work honestly. You will be treated fairly, but you must do the same. That is the only condition." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her features. "I promise. I will do anything for my daughter. I will work hard." Tom smiled. "I know you will." The widow took a deep breath, holding her daughter tightly. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope instead of fear. She had expected punishment for her actions, perhaps even violence, but instead, she found understanding, guidance, and a chance to survive. She realized that sometimes, kindness could change a life in ways she had never imagined. As they reached the small farm, the widow saw the animals waiting, horses, cows, chickens, and the farmer approaching with a friendly smile. Tom introduced her, explaining that she was willing to work hard and needed a safe place for her daughter. The farmer welcomed her warmly, offering water and food immediately. The child stirred, waking slightly, and smiled at the sight of fresh milk and bread. The widow felt tears in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear or grief. They were tears of relief and hope. For the first time, she believed that she and her daughter might survive and even find a place in this new town. Tom watched her carefully, knowing that his decision not to punish her had been the right one. Sometimes, he thought, the law was not just about rules and punishment. It was about helping those who could not help themselves, giving them a second chance, and showing that even in a harsh world, kindness could exist. The widow worked hard from that day forward, learning quickly how to care for the animals, how to tend the farm, and how to manage small tasks that made life easier for herself and her daughter. She never forgot the moment she had tried to steal a horse, or the mercy that had been shown to her. That day became a turning point, the moment when despair began to turn into hope, and survival became possible through honest work and human kindness. The widow's first days on the farm were not easy. The sun was hot, and the work was harder than she had imagined. Feeding the animals, mending fences, carrying water from the well, and tending to the small garden required strength she thought she had lost. Her hands became rough and calloused, and her feet ached from walking long distances across the dusty fields. Yet, every time she felt like giving up, she looked down at her daughter, sleeping quietly in a small bed in the corner of the modest room they were allowed to use. The child's soft breathing reminded her of why she had come this far. She had to endure for the sake of her daughter's survival. Sheriff Tom Gallagher visited the farm often. He would walk past the fields, checking on her progress, but he never interfered. He believed in letting people learn, in letting them find their own strength. Sometimes he offered advice, quietly pointing out a better way to mend a fence or feed the chickens. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fresh bread from the town bakery or a warm blanket for her daughter. He never treated her like a charity case. Instead, he treated her with respect, acknowledging her hard work and determination. The widow learned quickly. She discovered that the horses needed brushing every morning, that cows had to be milked carefully to avoid startling them, and that chickens required constant attention to prevent them from wandering off or being attacked by predators. The work was exhausting, but she began to feel a sense of accomplishment. Every small task completed was a victory, proof that she could survive without stealing, without fear, and with dignity. The townspeople began to notice her efforts. At first, some were skeptical. They had heard of her attempt to steal the sheriff's horse and wondered if she could be trusted. But as days turned into weeks, they saw her dedication. She arrived early in the morning, worked tirelessly, and never complained, even when the sun scorched the earth or when she had little food to eat. Slowly, attitudes began to change. A merchant might leave a small bag of flour at the farm, a neighbor might offer some fresh eggs, and the local doctor even offered a small vial of medicine for her daughter when she caught a cold. One afternoon, as the widow worked in the fields, Tom approached with a calm smile. "You're doing well," he said. "I see how hard you work and I'm proud of you." The widow paused, wiping sweat from her forehead. She looked at him, unsure if she should believe the words. "You really mean it?" she asked softly. Tom nodded. "Yes. You are learning quickly and your daughter is safe and well. That is something to be proud of. Most people would have given up by now, but you keep going. That shows strength." Her eyes filled with tears. She had faced so much rejection, so much harshness in the world that praise felt strange, almost unfamiliar. I only want to survive. I only want my daughter to have a chance. That is all," Tom smiled. "Then you are already succeeding. Keep working like this, and you will find that life can be better than you imagined." As the days passed, the widow began to feel more at home. The small cabin she and her daughter stayed in became a place of comfort. She tended the garden, growing vegetables that provided fresh food. She learned to cook simple meals with the ingredients she had, stretching them carefully so that nothing went to waste. She began to understand the rhythm of farm life. The early mornings, the long days, the satisfaction of completing hard work, and the small rewards that came from patience and effort. Her daughter thrived as well. With regular meals, warmth, and a safe place to sleep, the child grew stronger and more cheerful. She learned to help her mother with small tasks, carrying water in a tiny pail, gathering eggs from the chicken coop, and feeding the goats. The sight of her daughter laughing and playing in the sun filled the widow's heart with joy she had not felt in a long time. Every smile was proof that her struggles were worth it, that survival was not just about endurance but also about hope. Tom continued to visit, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just checking on their progress. He spoke kindly to the widow, asking how she felt, how her daughter was, and if she needed anything. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that someone in town cared about her well-being. He also spoke to the townspeople about her quietly, encouraging them to offer small acts of help. Slowly, the town began to warm toward her, seeing her not as a stranger or a thief, but as a hardworking woman doing her best in difficult circumstances. One day, a neighbor approached the widow while she was feeding the animals. "I see how hard you work," he said. "It's not easy, I know, but you make it look effortless. I think I misjudged you before. I thought you were trouble, but now I see you're just trying to live." The widow nodded, smiling faintly. "Thank you. I only want to do what is right." I want my daughter to have a safe life. That is all I ask." The neighbor smiled back. "Then you're welcome, and if you ever need anything, I will help. You've earned that respect." It was a small victory, but it mattered greatly. Every kind word, every small act of acknowledgement strengthened the widow's resolve. She realized that trust was earned slowly, through consistent effort, honesty, and perseverance. She had learned the hard way that the world could be harsh, but also that compassion and understanding existed, sometimes in unexpected places. At the farm, she developed a routine. She rose before dawn, tending to the animals and preparing a small breakfast for her daughter. Then she worked in the fields, repairing fences, collecting firewood, and caring for the livestock. She often sang softly to herself while working, a quiet song of hope and endurance. Her daughter would follow her, curious and eager to help in small ways. The two of them became a team, supporting each other through every challenge. One evening, after a long day of work, the widow sat on a small bench outside the cabin, brushing her daughter's hair. She looked at the fading sunlight and felt a quiet sense of peace. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself to believe that life could be better. The fear that had driven her to steal a horse began to fade, replaced by hope, determination, and the knowledge that she had the strength to face whatever came next. Tom visited that evening, bringing fresh bread and a warm blanket for the child. "You are doing very well," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've adapted to life here and your daughter is thriving. That shows courage and perseverance." The widow smiled. "I could not have done it without your help. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I will not forget that." Tom nodded. "I didn't do much. You did the hard work. You earned your place here. That is what matters." Over time, the widow became known in the town for her diligence and honesty. Merchants began offering her small jobs, knowing she could be trusted. People would bring extra food, blankets, or clothing, and she accepted these gifts with gratitude and humility. She had started as a stranger, nearly breaking the law out of desperation, but she was slowly becoming a respected member of the community. One day, as she was tending the garden, a child from the town approached, curious about her daughter. They watched as the widow taught her daughter how to plant seeds, water the soil, and care for the small plants. The town child ran back to tell the parents what she had seen. Soon, people realized that the widow's influence extended beyond her immediate survival. She was teaching patience, care, and responsibility. Tom watched quietly from a distance, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He had seen the widow transform from a desperate, frightened woman into someone who could face the world with confidence. She had learned to work hard, earn trust, and provide for her child without breaking the law. Her story became an example to others, that even in the hardest circumstances, determination and honesty could change a life. The widow herself felt a quiet pride. Every day brought challenges, but also small victories. She had learned that kindness could open doors, that hard work could earn respect, and that hope was stronger than fear. She had survived the desert, the rejection, and the despair. Now she was learning to thrive. And all of it began the day she tried to steal a horse and met a man who chose understanding over anger, empathy over punishment. The days turned into weeks, and the widow settled into the rhythm of farm life. Each morning the sun would rise, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, and she would awaken before dawn, her daughter still asleep beside her. She quietly prepared a small breakfast from the simple ingredients they had, making sure her daughter had enough to eat before heading out to work. The routines that had once felt overwhelming now gave her life structure and a sense of purpose. Her daughter, now brighter and stronger from regular meals and care, followed her mother like a small shadow. Together, they tended the animals, collected firewood, and cared for the small garden they had planted. The sight of her daughter laughing while chasing a chicken, or carefully watering the tiny vegetables filled the widow's heart with a joy she hadn't known in months. That joy became her motivation. Every task, no matter how hard or exhausting, was easier when done with the thought of her child's happiness. Sheriff Tom Gallagher continued to visit from time to time. He would stop by the farm with small gifts, fresh bread from the bakery, some dried fruits, or even a warm blanket for the coming winter nights. He always spoke kindly, offering guidance when needed, but never condescended or treated her like a charity case. The widow respected him deeply for that. He had offered her a chance without judgment, and she had worked hard to prove herself worthy of it. "You've grown stronger," he said one afternoon, watching her repair a section of the fence that had been damaged by a recent windstorm. "And your daughter, she's thriving. That shows determination and care. You've earned your place here." The widow smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Thank you, Sheriff. I only want to live honestly and provide for my daughter. Everything else I will work to achieve through hard work." Tom nodded approvingly. "And you're succeeding. People will notice, too. You are teaching others that effort and honesty matter." Indeed, the townspeople had begun to notice. Early on, many had been skeptical. A widow from a distant tribe, new to town and once caught trying to steal a horse, there were whispers of suspicion. But as the weeks passed, they saw her diligence. She never complained, never demanded help, and always thanked those who offered small kindnesses. Slowly, respect replaced skepticism. A neighbor, Mr. Carver, approached her one morning as she collected eggs from the chicken coop. "I see how hard you work," he said gruffly, but with genuine admiration. "Most people would give up after a week, but you keep going. That earns respect." The widow inclined her head politely. "Thank you, sir. I do what I must for my daughter. That is all I ask." Over time, more small gestures came. A baker left a loaf of bread by the farm gate. A local tailor offered to mend her daughter's clothes. Even the children in the town began to play near the farm, curious about the animals and the new life they had created. The widow welcomed their curiosity, letting them help with small chores or teaching them how to care for the animals. Each act of interaction strengthened her sense of belonging. One afternoon, the widow was in the garden when Sheriff Tom arrived. "I brought you some seeds," he said, handing her a small bag of vegetable seeds. "These will grow quickly and you'll have more variety for your meals." The widow's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Sheriff. I will plant them right away. My daughter will be happy." Together, they planted rows of seeds in the soft soil. As she worked, the widow spoke quietly about her hopes for the future. "I want my daughter to have education, to read books, to know the world beyond the desert. I want her to grow up safe and happy. That is all I desire." Tom nodded. "And she will. You've shown that hard work and honesty bring opportunities. With time, the town will fully accept you, and your daughter will have a bright future." As weeks became months, the widow's reputation in the town strengthened. People began to trust her judgment. When someone asked for advice about caring for animals or growing vegetables, she shared her knowledge generously. Her quiet dignity and consistent effort earned admiration. Even those who had initially doubted her now treated her with respect. She had transformed from a desperate outsider into a valued member of the community. Life on the farm also brought personal growth. The widow learned new skills, milking cows efficiently, preparing herbal remedies for minor ailments, and managing small trade exchanges with the townspeople. Every skill she learned was another step toward independence. She began to feel pride in her work, a confidence that had been absent during her days of wandering and desperation. Her daughter, too, flourished. She learned the value of hard work and responsibility, helping her mother with small tasks and tending to the garden. She played with other children in the town, learning to socialize and laugh freely. For the first time in her young life, she had stability, warmth, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Sheriff Tom stopped by again. The widow had just finished feeding the animals and was sitting on the porch, resting. Her daughter sat beside her, drawing small pictures in the dirt with a stick. Tom watched quietly for a moment, admiring the scene of domestic peace. "You've done well," he said finally, his voice calm. "Not just the work but the way you carry yourself. People in town are beginning to see your worth. They see that you are honest, hardworking, and kind." The widow looked at him, her eyes moist. "It has not been easy, Sheriff. There were days I thought I would fail, that we would have nothing, but we kept going. I kept going because I had no choice but to fight for my daughter's life." Tom nodded. "That determination is what matters most. You have proven that courage and persistence can overcome hardship, and the town will come to respect that." Indeed, in the following weeks, the widow began receiving small invitations to community events. She was asked to help with preparing meals for town gatherings, to assist in teaching younger children how to read, and even to guide new arrivals in the town on farm work. She accepted each opportunity with humility and grace, always careful to provide for her daughter first. One day, as she was carrying a basket of vegetables to the town square, a group of children approached her, laughing and chatting. "Can we help?" one asked. The widow smiled warmly. "Of course," she said. "Take the smaller vegetables first and carry them carefully. Let's make sure nothing is broken." As they worked together, she realized something remarkable. The town that had once ignored or doubted her now saw her as a teacher, a mentor, and a valued member of their community. She had earned trust through patience, diligence, and honesty. Even the adults began to treat her differently. Merchants spoke politely to her, offering fair prices for her work and goods. Farmers asked for her advice on caring for animals. The local doctor would sometimes check in on her daughter, providing medicine and guidance without charge. It was a new kind of life, one built on mutual respect, hard work, and the understanding that kindness could grow when given a chance. The widow often thought back to the day she had tried to steal a horse. She had expected anger, punishment, and rejection. Instead, she found understanding, guidance, and an opportunity to prove herself. That single act of mercy had changed her life completely. She realized that a single moment of compassion could ripple outward, creating opportunities and building trust where none had existed before. At night, after the work was done and her daughter was asleep, the widow would sit quietly on the porch, reflecting on how far they had come. She had survived hunger, fear, and despair. She had learned to work hard, care for others, and trust in people again. Her life had changed, not through luck alone, but through her own courage and the small kindnesses of those who had chosen to see her worth. Sheriff Tom often visited in the evenings, sitting quietly and watching the stars with her. They spoke of simple things, plans for the garden, ways to improve farm work, and occasionally, stories of life in Red Mesa. Through these conversations, the widow learned more about the town, its people, and the ways she could continue to build a stable life for her daughter. With each passing day, the widow grew stronger in body, mind, and spirit. She began to imagine a future that had once seemed impossible, a life where her daughter could grow safely, where they could belong to a community, and where honesty and hard work would be rewarded. She had survived desperation and found hope. She had endured hardship and discovered strength. And above all, she had learned that life, though difficult, could also be kind to those willing to persevere. The seasons changed, and with them, the widow and her daughter settled fully into their new life. The once fragile, desperate woman had grown stronger, her shoulders straighter, her steps surer. She rose each morning with the sun, tending to the animals, preparing meals, and teaching her daughter the values she had learned over the months: honesty, hard work, and kindness. The small garden they had planted flourished, providing fresh vegetables that they shared with neighbors, who now treated them as part of the town. Her daughter had grown in both health and confidence. The girls' laughter filled the farm and even the quiet streets of Red Mesa, and people often remarked on how cheerful and curious she had become. She had friends among the children in town, learning games and lessons she would have never had the chance to experience in the months of wandering and struggle. The widow watched her with pride, realizing that every hardship she had endured had been for this very moment, a life of security and possibility for her child. Sheriff Tom Gallagher continued his quiet visits, though they were no longer necessary for supervision. He had long ago seen that the widow was capable, responsible, and honest. Now he came as a friend, bringing advice, small gifts, or news of the town. He often walked with the widow in the evenings, listening as she spoke of hopes for the future. Sometimes they would sit quietly, enjoying the peace that had replaced the fear and uncertainty of her first days in Red Mesa. "You've done very well," Tom said one evening, as they watched the sun set over the desert hills. "Your daughter is thriving and the town has come to respect you. You have proven that courage, patience, and integrity matter more than fear or misfortune." The widow smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "I could not have done it alone," she replied softly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. That moment, it changed everything for us. My daughter and I will never forget it." Tom nodded. "It was not just me. It was your effort, your determination, your willingness to persevere. You earned this life. You built it with your own hands." Indeed, the widow had transformed her life through hard work, honesty, and perseverance. The town had come to see her as a valuable member of the community, someone who could be trusted, someone who contributed not just labor but wisdom, kindness, and courage. Merchants offered her fair prices for the small goods she produced. Neighbors invited her to help with communal tasks, and people of all ages sought her advice or companionship. She had truly become part of Red Mesa. One bright morning, as she worked in the garden, she noticed children from the town playing nearby. They had gathered to watch the animals and help with small chores. The widow guided them patiently, showing them how to carry water, plant seeds, and care for the animals without causing harm. Her daughter joined eagerly, laughing and helping, proud to be part of this new community. The widow realized that this was more than survival, it was growth. She was no longer merely keeping her daughter alive. She was providing an environment where her child could thrive, learn, and form lasting relationships. That thought filled her with deep satisfaction and gratitude. Every hardship endured, every long walk across the desert, every tear shed in loneliness had led to this moment of stability, belonging, and hope. As the day went on, Sheriff Tom stopped by the farm, bringing news of improvements in town and small gifts from the local store. "The town speaks highly of you now," he said kindly. "They've seen your hard work and honesty. You've earned their respect." The widow's eyes glistened. "I am grateful," she said. "It was not easy, but we kept going. My daughter and I, we have hope now, and that makes everything worth it." Tom smiled. "Hope is the most powerful thing you can have. It guides you through the darkest times and it allows others to see your true strength. You have both." Weeks later, the widow was invited to a town gathering to celebrate a successful harvest. It was the first time she had attended such an event, and she felt both nervous and excited. People she had once feared would judge her now greeted her warmly. The children waved, neighbors smiled, and even some merchants she had struggled to approach now thanked her for her contributions. She realized that she had moved from being an outsider, a desperate woman trying to survive, to being someone valued and respected in her community. During the gathering, she noticed Sheriff Tom standing quietly nearby, observing the scene with a calm smile. He nodded at her, a gesture of approval and pride. She understood that this celebration was not just for the harvest, it was also a recognition of her resilience, her hard work, and the positive impact she had on the town. Later, she spoke with other women at the gathering, sharing stories of her life and listening to theirs. She realized that many had faced challenges, loss, and hardship, but through perseverance, they had found ways to survive and thrive. The conversation reminded her that she was not alone in her struggles. Community and compassion had helped her rebuild her life, and she could now offer the same support to others. That night, as she returned to the farm, the widow felt a sense of peace she had never known. She tucked her daughter into bed, holding her close and feeling the warmth of her small body against her chest. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from desperation and fear to safety, acceptance and hope. She knew that life would still have challenges, but she had the strength, knowledge, and support to face them. Sheriff Tom stopped by one last time that evening before returning to his duties. "You've done more than survive," he said quietly. "You've built a life. And your daughter, she has a bright future because of you." The widow smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I only hope I can continue to give her the life she deserves. I will work hard every day to make sure she is safe and happy." Tom nodded. "You will. And remember, you're not alone. The town is here to help, and you have earned their trust and respect. That is something no one can take away." In the months that followed, the widow and her daughter continued to thrive. The farm flourished, the garden provided a steady supply of food, and the daughter grew healthy and confident. Neighbors often sought advice or help, and the widow generously offered both. She became a symbol of resilience, a living example that honesty, hard work, and courage could transform even the harshest circumstances. One day, as the widow walked through town with her daughter, people greeted her warmly. A merchant handed her a small bundle of flour. A child waved and ran to show her a drawing, and neighbors called out words of encouragement. She realized that she had not only survived but had become a valued member of the community. Her daughter ran ahead to the small creek at the edge of town, laughing as she played. The widow watched, smiling, remembering the days when survival had been uncertain, when hunger and fear had dominated their lives. Now they had a future, a life built on effort, kindness, and the chance given by someone who had seen their need and offered help instead of punishment. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in warm colors, the widow sat on the porch of the farm cabin, holding her daughter close. She reflected on the journey from desperation to hope, from fear to belonging. Every step, every struggle, and every act of courage had led to this moment of peace and security. Sheriff Tom passed by quietly, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. The widow smiled and nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Without his early understanding, without that moment of mercy when she had tried to steal a horse, her life might have taken a very different path. Now, she had stability, safety, and a community that respected her efforts. As the stars emerged in the night sky, the widow whispered to her daughter, "We have come far, little one, and we will go even further. Together we can face anything." Her daughter, eyes wide with trust and innocence, hugged her mother tightly. The widow held her close, feeling a warmth that had been missing for too long. She knew that the days ahead would have challenges, but she also knew that love, determination, and honesty could overcome nearly anything. In Red Mesa, the story of the widow and her daughter became well known. People spoke of how a desperate woman, once on the verge of breaking the law, had transformed her life through effort, honesty, and courage. They remembered Sheriff Tom's quiet act of understanding, and how it had changed the course of two lives forever. The widow became a symbol of hope, a living reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, compassion, trust, and perseverance could create new beginnings. The widow never forgot that day she had tried to steal a horse. It had been a moment of fear, desperation, and uncertainty, but it had also been the day her life truly began. That one act of mercy, combined with her determination and hard work, had given her and her daughter the chance to build a life filled with safety, hope, and belonging. As the years passed, the widow and her daughter continued to grow and thrive. They became respected members of the town, their story inspiring others to act with kindness, understanding, and courage. And every evening, as the sun set over Red Mesa, the widow would sit on her porch, her daughter beside her, and smile, knowing that from the darkest of beginnings, a bright and hopeful future had been built.